I know what you're thinking. You know what blending modes are. Why are we talking about it again? Well, another way to describe this issue would be the idea of avoiding contrast creep. That's a term I coined. I don't know what the actual term is, but the essential idea is you make a thumbnail, then you make a rough, and then you add details. And in that process, you're trying to avoid straying from your initial idea. If we were to look at this very small and in black and white mode, this rough and this final are pretty similar. From a high level value distribution standpoint, they're pretty much the same image. And that's good. That's best practice if you're making an image. You don't want the polish phase to risk kind of throwing you off course. That's essentially changing your design mid-project, which can be dangerous. So if that's our goal, we want to add details without straying from the general values. We have to know how to control this stuff. So if I have a sphere like this one here and I want to apply a rock texture to it, we'll say this is the rock texture I'm going to use. I think the default that everybody thinks about is they say, okay, I'm going to put a photo overlay. It's going to be set to the multiply blending mode. Well, that's what happens. Let's look at this in black and white and see what that looks like. Here is before. This is the sphere as we want it. We've decided for whatever reason, this is the perfect set of values. Okay, so we put our photo on top. Overall, this is much darker. I have not just added detail, I've also lowered the overall values in the composition. If you wanted to do this on purpose, I'd suggest you'd be better off still darkening the values first to make sure the whole composition reads correctly, and only then add photo details. So photo details are not a blunt instrument. They're not making radical changes. We're making subtle changes. We want to keep in control. This does not to say we can't use the rock texture. All we need to do is understand how are the blending modes going to help us accomplish the goal we want. What I've done here is I've modified it into 3 basic categories, and this corresponds with the 3 types of blending modes we have. We've got types that darken down the image. This would be your multiply blending mode, for instance. If we want to darken down the image, we only want to do it with very light images. There are ones that live around the center point, 50% value. These are ones that both lighten and darken the image. And then there are ones that lighten the image. And so to be subtle, you have to do it with a largely dark image to start with. So let's see all these in action. I have put them into my image. We'll start with a very light image here, which if we were to see it on a normal blending mode, this is what it would look like. But what I want to do is set it to multiply because it will darken the details. Now I've masked half of it so we can see the difference. And especially far away, you can tell this isn't changing the image all that much. Let's look at it in black and white. See that? Yeah, it's a little darker and it's a little more contrasty. But generally speaking, it's pretty much the same values I started with. So that's good. In this case, I've used the multiply blending mode in order to apply rock details, and that worked pretty well because the image was so light to begin with. Okay, so we'll go down now to middle values. Here we have what it looks like on normal blending mode, so you can see it's just totally opaque. But if I wanted to add these rock details and not change the underlying layer so much, I would set this to overlay blending mode. Here you can see it's adding a bit of color, it's adding lighter values and darker values, but generally speaking, especially when we see in black and white, it's not changing it all that much. This is good. So this would also be a successful use. Now, within the mid-range blending modes, there's actually another one you can use as well. So here we're looking at overlay. Its bigger brother is hard light. Hard light is sort of like higher contrast overlay. I don't really understand the particulars of the math, but I do know that if I want something to look punchier or more visible, I'll use hard light. But most of the time, I just use overlay. Okay, and then finally, we have these dark ones. And this is where you only want to lighten the image. And here's what that looks like. So on a normal blending mode, we can see that this is the image. It's very dark. And that means that all these black details are ignored, because when I set it to the screen blending mode, all we're seeing are pixels that are lighter than black are going to be added to the value. If I mask half of it, you can see that going on. So it's never darkening at all. It's only lightening. And the way I'm able to be subtle and to only change the value a little bit is because that started so dark. So just to review, we have 3 categories. We have mid-tone ones, that is your overlays and your hard light. We have darkening blending modes, like multiply, and for that you want to have a lighter image. And then we have lightening blending modes, like screen, which you want to start with a dark image. Before I forget, while we're talking about dark blending modes, if overlay's bigger brother was hard light, I would say screen's bigger brother is linear dodge. This is a higher contrast, punchier version of screen. Now, in this example, I've gone out of my way to try and make them essentially interchangeable. But as you learn to use these, it's going to be very situational. You're going to learn that certain types of photos work best as lightening the details, and certain types of photos work best darkening the details. But now that you've seen the general categories, it's clear that we're going to need to be able to take a photo and modify it in a certain way. So let's spend some time modifying base photos.